I've been trying to think how best to mark the passing of Malcolm Dome, the legendary rock journalist and all-round splendid man who I was so lucky to have known while working at Kerrang and ever since. And I kind of thought to myself, should I write a blog post? Should I write, a Facebook post? Quite honestly though, you're not going to read a better obituary than the one that Phil Alexander has written over at Kerrang.com, and which I'm going to link to downstairs in the video description. So what I just thought I'd do, rather than try to write some perfect piece that I'm probably going to agonise over, is just switch on the camera and talk about Malcolm and my impressions of him, and that's what I'm going to do. During this video we're going to celebrate Malcolm's work by looking at some classic issues of the wonderful magazine Metal Kerrang from the mid to late 80s, which started off as a straight metal magazine and then basically became a thrash metal bible. And it's funny, Malcolm has left us, and that's just really sad. I found out on Monday, it's now Friday, and the information is just about to vaguely register in my head that Malcolm has gone. And yes, that's sad, and yet it's kind of going to be impossible not to smile while remembering Malcolm, because he was such a funny, delightful, and often ludicrous character. And I mean ludicrous, of course, in the best possible way. Malcolm was the man who coined the term thrash metal. To be honest with you, I either never knew this or I'd forgotten over the years. But you know why I never knew this, or I came to forget? Because Malcolm would never tell you. He would never have said that. He would never have said thrash metal. Oh yes, of course, I coined that name. Never in a million years would Malcolm have boasted about pretty much anything, I believe, and that's just one of the lovelier aspects of his character. Malcolm was an absolute one-off. There will never be another Malcolm Dome. He was just an incredibly intelligent, eccentric gentleman within the world of metal. He just had an incredible brain, an astonishing brain. He could have turned his hand to anything he wanted to do. He could have become a scientist. I think he could have become a scientist, but he chose to write about heavy metal instead. And so that really gifted the world of rock journalism with his mind. And I think everyone writing about Malcolm that I've seen has used the word encyclopedic. Yeah, he had a properly encyclopedic knowledge of metal and music and an incredible memory. As far as I understand it, Malcolm never recorded interviews. He might have recorded maybe a few if they were really long, I'm not sure. But I gathered that he could just remember an interview. And also, more likely, perhaps he was typing the person's quotes as they talked to him on the phone, which is quite astonishing. Now, Malcolm spent a few years on Kerrang magazine when it first arrived, and then moved off to help found the magazine Raw, which was a competitor of Kerrang, and then came back to Kerrang to be the news editor. Now, I moved to London in 1993 to write for Kerrang, and Malcolm was there, and so what a joy to see him in the office every time I went in. And Malcolm would always be sitting there with his phone tucked under his chin, yapping away to someone, probably interviewing them, while typing away furiously, just really fast. Honestly, I couldn't estimate how many words Malcolm Dome must have written during his entire career. I mean, millions of words, I would say. Even though he took rock and metal as seriously as anyone else in terms of loving the music and his passion for the music, he also knew how ludicrous it was. And so around Malcolm there's a whole swarm of kind of running gags, ridiculous phrases and nicknames. Malcolm was known as Mickey Doom, I think because of his penchant for doom metal, among other subgenres. Malcolm and I always found, to this very day, well, not to this day sadly, up until 3 weeks ago when I last spoke to Malcolm on the email, we were still laughing about the fast show Tailors, that sketch with the two tailors going, "Oh, suits you, sir." The last emails I ever exchanged with Malcolm ended, in fact I think the last thing he ever said to me on the email was "oh." which is pretty cool. You see, I told you I'd be smiling and laughing because it's impossible not to. Yeah, it's impossible not to when you're talking about Malcolm. He He was just someone who I never heard him say, I'm pretty sure I never heard him say a bad word about anybody, and I definitely never heard anyone say a bad word about Malcolm. How rare is that? You know, the rock world, it is a pretty tight-knit family, but it's not as if, no bitching goes on. Certainly there's gossip, but I never, heard Malcolm being spoken badly of in any gossip, or he was just loved by everyone because he was a joy to be around. In the last 20 years, whenever I bumped into Malcolm at a gig, it was a delight. The last time I saw Malcolm in person was at this Testament show at the Kentish Town Forum in London, just days before the pandemic began. And before that, I saw him at a Sodom show at the Camden Underworld, which segues nicely into our first look at his Mega Metal Kerrang pieces. Yeah, this is in one of the Mega Metal Kerrangs. Here's the cover of that particular issue with Kai Hansen and Halloween on the cover. And I love this picture taken by another dear departed friend of mine, Ray Palmer. I love this picture of the band just looking like filthy reprobates. And then there's Malcolm's piece. I'm not sure, this might have been the first Sodom piece in Kerrang, in the whole Kerrang universe. I'm not sure. And Malcolm often had an obscure turn of phrase. Some of his intros needed a bit of translation occasionally, or interpretation. Let me read the opening the opening paragraph of this piece by Malcolm about a thrash metal band called Sodom. 3 steel-laced hats in a ring with no substance. 3 harsh cubes undissolved in a sugar basin of wet slush. 3 slash strokes on a dispirited, pressure-leaking tyre tread. Please welcome Essen Essentials Sodom back into the arena. And my word, don't the thrash world need this lot at the moment? I have no idea, really. I think it means basically that they are kind of, wheat among chaff, essentially. Yes, that's what he was saying there. It's a really cool piece. And let's have a look at another Malcolm Dome classic, an interview with King Diamond from this classic issue of Mega Metal. This was when the magazine went full on thrash. And, well, obviously King Diamond isn't thrash, but nevertheless, it went pretty much full on thrash. And this is a lovely interview by Malcolm with a classic picture of the King there. And they're talking about King Diamond's new album, Abigail, which of course is a classic album. Abigail is amazing, isn't it? Yeah, it's just a really good piece. And here's another one, the cover story of this issue. And I think that's a classic photo session there. Oh, another classic Domian intro here as well. Let's have a look at that. Yes. A stone, a river, a protagonist, an observer. The protagonist throws the stone into the river. The observer merely watches the ripples spreading ever outwards before they diminish into immobile patterns. Then, nothing. We're all guilty of watching the surface, of listening to it, of touching it, of smelling it, of ... missing the point so often because we are not prepared to delve and probe. With Swiss-American outfit Celtic Frost, it is the pattern and effect the stone makes on its descent that matters, rather than the ripples on the surface. With Celtic Frost, one has to be patient, steadfast, earnest. The results are worth it. See, that's not your standard rock journalism, is it? It's not your standard kind of bashing it out like, I'm hanging out with a band and they say this to me. Malcolm's brain and outlook on life, not to mention his prodigious intake of vodka, and in his later years, Zambuca. All that stuff just set Malcolm apart. And it's such a cliche to say, it really is, but some cliches are cliches because they're true. You really don't fully appreciate the hole that someone is going to leave until they've left that hole. And Malcolm was a nexus point in just at the center of the rock universe, essentially. He was great on a social level. He was very sociable, always loved to chat, and he would bring people together. He would be a bit of a matchmaker. He would say, oh, you might want to hear this album, or you might want to do this job, or Malcolm would pair people up. And also his encyclopedic knowledge of music extended to an encyclopedic knowledge of the industry. If you wanted to know who was doing PR on something, then you only had to ask Malcolm and he would soon tell you. Just an incredible font of information, both on the page and behind the scenes as well. There are so many other things I could tell you about Malcolm, but basically it boils down to this. I loved him. I think he was an awesome person. He's one of the nicest people I ever met, and I'm really going to miss him. If you're going to miss him too, and if you've appreciated his work or him as a person over the years, then I'd love you to leave some kind of tribute down in the comments, so maybe we could build up, you know, an impression, a bigger and more rounded impression of Malcolm the man. Yes, the man of metal. Thanks for watching this to the end, and as Malcolm would say, let that be a lesson to you.